Hello friends, I made this for. I'm going to get straight into it today because we are working with a loaded card. This is the last weekend of Scorpio season, and that's kind of crazy to think about. I feel like we've been in this season forever, but we have to close out this season with probably one of the most important cards to me in relationship to Scorpio. We talked about death, and now it's time to really dive into Scorpio's planet in the tarot. So, and that would be, as you've already guessed it, Judgment. So, we're going to be looking at this card and Pluto through many different decks. I know this is going to be a long video already. I've just started. But there's a lot to cover. There is history. There is classical meanings, as well as what I think are really the deeper invitations to get into. So we've got 5 decks that I'm using for this, because Judgment is something that is not always, every tarot writer or illustrator has their own way of interpreting this card. But there has been some interpretations that take this card totally different. So not even calling it Judgment. And I think that's something that is really important to reflect on, and actually really helpful when better understanding what we're working with. So let's dive into it. We got a lot of decks here. So I'm going to be starting with the Smith Waite deck. The Heel deck, Way Home Tarot deck, the Cosmic Tarot deck, because I am such a fan, and one deck that really got me into tarot, but is technically kind of an oracle deck, but still tarot driven. So we'll get into that later. So, Pluto. Let's talk about Pluto as a planet really fast. Pluto is a generational planet. It's a big one. It is the ruler of Scorpio, and when we talk about generational planets, it's one of those things where I feel like generation shouldn't be millennial, Gen X, or Gen Y, blah, blah, blah. It should be really, what is your fucking Pluto in? Because that says a lot. And I feel like it's a 2 kind of wave planet as far as generations go. There's how it affects things the moment you are born, and how that impact influences the generations to come, because they influence each other. Our government right now is really run by people who are mostly Pluto and Leo people. So there's a lot to unpack there, right? Coming up behind them is people. Really, I feel like Gen X, which is mostly the generation Pluto and Libra. And then there's me, Pluto and Scorpio. And we have the, after that is Pluto in Sag. And right now Pluto is in Capricorn. This is like different ways that we can explore our generations. What's the technology coming out, and what sort of sign was Pluto in when you were born? I feel like that says a lot about us as people, because this really affects us as a pool, as a group. And there's a lot of lessons. We talked before that a phrase for Pluto is transformation. That's really loaded, right? And we're going to see how Judgment is really loaded when we're breaking it down. Through the eyes of Pluto. So we have this generational planet. Some people think it's not a planet. Fuck you. I think it's a planet. Sorry. Unfuck yourself. You're fine. And we're going to kind of look at the classical meaning of Judgment first to really give us a starting point. Because there's definitely some old school ways of looking at this through the tarot. And it's valid. I definitely think they're valid, but definitely something to expand upon. So let's get into it. Hi. Thanks for still being here if you are, because I'm kind of heavy on the energy today. Ha! So, like I said, Smith-Waite. These are the cards. For Scorpio, we have Death, of course, coming in on their beautiful white horse. The Pope, which we could almost look at as the Hierophant, because I think that's kind of funny, is right there like, please no. And then there's this. So these are very similar cards, right? We see something very similar here at the at what we're looking at. It's kind of a swap if you look at it as death coming for life and life coming for death. If we look at it that way, that's kind of an interesting flip. As far as like looking through this on the eyes of Scorpio. So this is our most classic rendition. We see dead people. They're almost zombies, little zombie baby butt. Weird, but okay. Being called. This is the angel. Judgment coming for those that are dead. It's something to kind of reflect on very quickly is this version of the tarot, this classic version, has a lot of Christian imagery. I think we kind of even went over that with the Hierophant. It's very Christian and very Catholic symbology, since of course around this time that was where it originated from, that was the #1 religion. I myself was raised Southern Baptist, so this kind of will influence how I interpret this card. And so if that doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. Obviously, I'm not Christian because I feel like it's very frowned upon in Christianity to be a tarot reader. I don't resonate with it a lot as a religion, but I get where it's coming from in its purest form, I think. And so that's some of the language I'm going to be personally using today is from my upbringing. So if that bothers you or you don't resonate with it, that's totally valid. I know Christianity has not been kind to many people in the world, so if you feel a type of way, that's pretty valid. But I'm going to be using some language like that, just so heads up. So in the classic idea of this card, some people read it as, how are you judging yourself? How are you judging others? Or how are other people judging you? And I think that's valid to an extent, because like there is a part of that makes sense. You know, like this can be an invitation to acknowledge that and observe that and just kind of check how you're thinking. I've definitely pulled it and felt that is for other people and myself, and I've definitely felt that was what the invitation for this card was, specifically in those spreads. So that is the most classic reading of this card. And I think to an extent, like I said, that makes sense. But if we're looking at this card as an invitation for this season and the lessons, I don't think that's enough. I feel like that's, and just in general, it's a very, what's the word? It's very surface level. It doesn't really dig into the meat and potatoes of what this card can really invite us to reflect on. So, and I also think the imagery of this card can be pretty dark. So there's a lot of different ways that different artists interpret this. But before we move on to those, reflecting a little more, we see there's these open hands, this like asking almost for saving. There's this asking for help, opening, this invitation of like opening to salvation. It's a word that might trigger some people, but this idea in Christianity, we are in search of salvation, right? That's like the idea of being a Christian is you're trying to get closer to your oneness to God in this way. You're trying to save your soul. You want to spend eternity in heaven, right? There's this invitation of, I want that saving. But I think a way of looking at this, if we see judgment in this way, I think another invitation that we can take away, even from this image, is, oh, now I can't remember the word. Transformation, for sure. We're being transformed from an earthly body to a heavenly body, and raising our vibration in that way. Maybe it will come to me as we move on. And then we kind of see a similar reflection in the Cosmic Tarot. So we have, again, Death from this deck, which has the light. There's the little bird on their hand, which is like, oh, don't look at the big, sharp, shiny thing. Look at this little bird I found. It's cute. It's not so bad. Don't mind me. So there's that invitation. Then we see, again, both of these mirror a similar idea, almost like how we were seeing in the other Judgment and Death, is this light in the background. This, like, it's not all darkness. And we see this again mirrored here. So what's very similar from the card we were just looking at in the Cosmic Tarot is that we see the trumpets of heaven. The trumpet was in this card as well, right? The angel is signaling this trumpet with the cross on the thing. It's a whole deal. But we see this light almost as a rising up. I feel like a good word that comes to me with this is resurrection, which is very Christian. Again, the resurrection of Christ. After 3 days, there was the rising. And these people are literally like coming out of the ground. It's not just tombs like it is in this card. They're literally like busting out the ground like, this is it. I'm excited. We're free. Death can't take us now. It's almost this resurrection, this transmutation where we're heeding the call of this higher growth. And we almost see this reflected in the colors here, right? Like traveling through chakras to a higher place. But the only way to get there is to transmute this experience of death. We have to die to be brought back. We have to let things die to transform to this next stage. That is the invitation I think that Judgment is really talking about. Sometimes a big ego death is like working through our judgments, working through how are we judging ourselves and others. But really, when we get down to that, if we really like pay attention to that, it's not about other people, right? If we're judging ourselves or others, it's not about them. It's really a reflection on how we are being triggered by somebody else. And that's a good reflection in this card. It's not about other people. It's about how are we transforming that experience. Because I think one thing that can really be taken away from this card is like we are being reborn. We are heeding the call of our soul's purpose and transforming our earthly understanding to that higher place. And that might come off a little like woo-woo, but that's like, it's fucking tarot, whatever. It's gonna be woo-woo sometimes. And that's really like the invitation here. It's like we're being called to that higher place, to release these ideas of self, to release these ideas of others, so that we can continue the transformation, right? Pluto is here to teach us this transformation. It's about that life, death, life, death cycle. the light at the end of the tunnel. Once we get past this person, once we allow ourselves to fall into the understanding of like, yeah, I don't know, but I need to change. I just need to get to that next place of understanding, a deeper understanding. Sometimes our ideologies have to die. Sometimes our projections of self have to die. When we're looking at judgment, we're really being triggered by a lot of things, because it's not just, oh, I'm judging myself and this is an opportunity to learn and change that. It's like, how am I transforming myself past the ideas of who I am into like who I am truly? So let's take it a little further. Let's take it to the Way Home Tarot and, see how it looks a little different. So we talked about death, this natural process, and this natural cycle of we allow ourselves to fade away so that we can be reborn. I love how Judgment looks in this deck, because literally, look at it. It really takes that invitation of rebirth, of resurrection, and takes it to that next step. This is a cicada, and coming from the south, I'll tell you what, these little bastards spend their whole existence, most of their existence, under the earth, not bothering anybody, and then they come up and become this thing and just buzz to high heaven. They are here to sing for us. But they start out in this weird little creature that leaves this shell and has wings. It really is a great metaphor for what judgment is about. We have to leave this old identity behind, this old idea, this old project, this old relationship, this old method of handling things, this old pattern, because there's so much more potential than just what this is. This is not our true potential. We have to let that go. We have to bust out of it. And what's interesting with cicadas is, like I said, they spend the majority of their life cycle is spent underground. And there's this resurrection. I think, maybe that's a triggering word for people because of its Christian tendencies and usage, but really, judgment is about being reborn. We're stepping into that higher purpose. Yeah, we gotta die a little bit sometimes, because some lessons are painful. Some lessons are not. But some things have to be let go. And that's the invitation here. So when we're talking about, the invitations of Scorpio season, we've been talking about death, but there is the light at the tunnel that's super important to keep in mind. This is the invitation of Scorpio. We talked about the life cycle, the scorpion, the eagle, and the phoenix. Pluto, in Scorpio, Pluto as the planet of Scorpio really helps us encapsulate what the full lesson and message is. What is the full spectrum of this experience? Because it's not just suffering, it's not just death, it's rebirth. It's reaching that higher consciousness of understanding. And so now I want to kind of dig into how other cards or other decks have looked at this card and kind of expanded on that in their own way, kind of using different language for the same idea. So to start us off, look, bless me, this deck talked about death, that arm coming up and raising hell to be like taking out this, like, we see the waters of Scorpio, which I think are really awesome here. We are on the waters. We are going to the subconscious depths in this card, and we're on that, like, we might be on here alone, but that's where some good transformation comes from. And then we have Eon. This is the invitation from this deck, and it's interesting. It might be a little hard to see, but there's a lot to process here. So we see the land being split in these two directions, these two valleys. We see fire and water coming from the sky. We see this fetus in the air hovering over this earth, and an eye in the sky, almost like the angel that we were talking about in the first deck. So we see this, like, little bit of mirroring. This is definitely the card to represent judgment in this deck, because it's number 20. But this is how this artist and writer decided to interpret this idea, because ultimately this is almost a story of coming of. This is a story of huge earth-shattering change, but there's an egg, right? We see the baby inside the egg, this little fetus inside the egg in the sky. This is the idea of, like, rebirth, this split of land, this huge change that's happening. But there's this idea of, like, someone is watching, someone is being mindful, and someone is planting the seed in this split change happening. And I think this is a good interpretation of Pluto as well, that we really get to see this is not an easy task. Rebirth is not an easy task. But this is a transformation. This is an invitation of allowing that pain to create these new paths for us, because the seed will be planted. We are that seed, and we're planting this for ourselves. We've gone through the waters of Scorpio in this season. We've been on that little boat through the emotional seas to the shore that might not be perfect. It might not be comfortable looking, but once we get through some of this ego shit, we are able to really transform and get to the heart of, like, you know, Scorpio is I desire, right? If that's a phrase for Scorpio, I desire my truest self. I desire deep transformation to be my full potential. That's the invitation here. That, like, if we're looking at that through Pluto and Scorpio kind of as a union, this, like, bridge of these two things, that's really a great way of looking at it. Is it's not just there are options once we get there, once we get to that transformation. Lava and water, we have got a lot to work with. And I think this also specifically is really interesting when we get to Temperance for Sag, which is next season coming up. This almost alludes to that to me a little bit. I'll get into that later, next video, because we're running very late, and I have one more card to go into. So, John Holland is an amazing author as far as tarot goes, and, like, this is what kind of got me into tarot. The Psychic Tarot of the Heart is my first tarot deck, but then I got this to kind of go deeper into just, like, tarot stuff. So more on that in another video as well. So the interpretations of these cards, they're all linked to tarot cards for the most part. There's 7 cards that are for the chakras exclusively, but these cards they're an oracle deck because they use numbers and the whole idea of the tarot with them, but they simplify it to a word and an idea that gets down to it. And number 20, which is judgment in the Psychic Tarot Oracle deck, is truth. So how can we close all this out? What is the takeaway? It's truth. It's our truth. It's who we really are. It's what we're in search of always. Where we want to be when Jesus comes back. He's coming back. Just kidding. I don't know. What are we here to really learn and integrate? It's truth. That's what judgment is. We're in search of the truth. We're opening ourselves to our truth. We're opening ourselves to our highest truth. To that connection to spirit, to each other, this oneness. Judgment is not, judgment of others, judgment of ourselves is not truth. The truth is what we get when we peel back those layers of ego, of self, and you know, the ego is not evil, but there are lessons under ego that we're here to learn. Sometimes we have to die a little bit to get there, but the resurrection, the reclamation, this whole thing, what is it really for? The gateway to heaven, quote unquote. This gateway to oneness with God, quote unquote. It's truth, right? We don't want to live in the illusion. We want to live in the truth. So judgment is truth. Or at least that's the invitation that we can take away if we're really like, okay, what is Scorpio season's deep, huge lessons? If we're trying to get some lessons from Pluto in this Scorpio season, it's an invitation to truth of who you really are. And so that is where I'm going to leave us off on. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, that's really great of you, because this is fucking long. But like I said, judgment ain't easy. Judgment ain't a card that's here to just be simple. It's not just cut and dry, blah, 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 this and that. There are many ways to interpret this. There are many ways to look at this as an invitation. If you're Scorpio or have Scorpio placements, looking at your Pluto just in general, this is like a way of diving deeper into that. If you're looking at judgment just in your journey as a tarot reader, there's a lot to dive into there. So take out your judgment card. Look at it. Really, like, what is it saying? Who's crawling out the earth? What is it looking like for you? And how are you connecting with that energy this season? Because we got 1 week left, family. And then it's temperance, because we're in Sag season. Thank God. Because I'm ready to fuck my way out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Fuck my way out of here. Oh, anyway. Have a beautiful weekend. Just some things to think about that are real light and happy. Just some things to think about. Anyway, I love you and love that you were here for this. Bye.